Welcome to this HFY story. If you enjoy science fiction where humanity defies the odds, survives impossible worlds, and changes the galaxy forever, you're in the right place. Sit back, relax, and if you like what you hear, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. I asked, why? My voice steady as my hologram hovered above the center of the table inside the Galactic Council's grand chamber. Krell Torin, the council president, didn't answer me right away. Instead, he lifted a strip of clearly overpriced fabric and calmly began polishing the backward curving horns that jutted out from his green forehead and ran along the back of his skull. Like this was all just another boring meeting to him. He took his time. Then he smiled, slow and satisfied, clearly enjoying the quiet amusement rippling through the other council members. Only after soaking it in did he finally speak. It's hardly the council's responsibility that you Deathworlders can't go a single cycle without dragging yourselves into another war. It was a lie. Clean one delivered smoothly. They all knew it. I knew it. The council had personally sent out an emergency call, begging for assistance to defend one of their mining stations. Then, when things turned ugly, their fleet never showed up. They left us alone to face the Granik Empire in a full-scale war that never should have been ours to fight. Simple betrayal. Nothing fancy about it. I didn't respond. Not with words, anyway. My projection slowly rotated, deliberately, as I looked each council member straight in the eyes, one by one. The silence stretched tight, like a wire pulled too far. I wasn't just looking at them. I was measuring them, seeing who agreed with the lie, who was willing to stand behind it. Krell Torin grew irritated. I could tell. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. Humans were meant to be emotional, reckless, loud. We were supposed to yell, threaten, lose control, make fools of ourselves. That was the whole point of this setup, to prove we didn't belong anywhere near real galactic power. Instead, I was doing something that clearly unsettled them. I was thinking. My gaze stopped on Ambassador Liraventa of the Plick. Her thin, spindly frame stood out under the chamber lights. The veins running along her neck glowed faintly with natural bioluminescence, giving her an almost ghost-like look. Her flowing robes drifted as if stirred by a breeze that didn't exist. She stayed perfectly still under my stare, though one long finger tapped once against her chair's armrest. I spoke quietly. Ambassador Lyra, do you have anything you'd like to say? I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I dared her to lie the way Krell Torin had. She crossed her long arms over her chest. The glow in her neck flared brighter for a split second before she closed her purple eyes. The Galactic Council bears no responsibility for humanity's wars, she said calmly. Then she tilted her head slightly. Perhaps your primitive translation technology malfunctioned. It may have misread a routine communication as a distress call. That would explain why you involved yourselves in a conflict over nothing more than an outdated mining outpost. I felt the muscles in my neck tighten. My veins throbbed. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. The lie was obvious. Insultingly obvious. But I didn't explode. Krell Torin leaned forward, clearly intrigued. Deathworlders weren't supposed to show restraint like this. I turned my attention to HFY, the Zintan, small, furred, sitting in a raised seat beside Lyra. He barely came up to half the height of most ambassadors, and his whiskers twitched nervously. I didn't ask him anything. I didn't need to. I just looked at him. My head tilted slightly, a gesture that somehow managed to be both patient and dangerous. Charwanan swallowed and spoke in a high, squeaky voice. Both the Granik and humanity are primitive Deathwielders who escalated a minor asteroid belt incident into a full war. Any evolved species would have resolved it through diplomacy. He straightened as he spoke, confidence growing. What else could we expect from beings still ruled by fear responses and territorial instincts? Your kind simply can't help itself. Then he did something that made Krell Torin's eyes widen with pleasure. HFY stuck out his tongue at me. In Zintan culture, it was one of the deepest insults possible. He held it there, black eyes gleaming. The chamber erupted. Laughter filled the air. Krell Torin's deep rumble, Lyra's light chime like amusement. the Sarek ambassador's harsh hiss. The insectoid Zytric clicked rapidly in his own species' version of laughter. I didn't move. My face didn't change. I turned toward the insectoid and the reptile. Ambassador Zytric's mandibles clacked as he spoke, his compound eyes catching the light. Human species displays standard Deathworld paranoia. Council Collective offered support within approved parameters. Human species chose violent escalation in response to Granik provocation. The Sarek ambassador followed, his crimson scales darkening with barely hidden contempt. His forked tongue flicked once before he spoke. The truth is simple. Your species seeks conflict. The Council cannot be blamed for your nature. We act for galactic stability, not the revenge-driven obsessions of war-addicted creatures. I looked at every single one of them one last time. Krell Torin felt it then. I saw it in his posture. A cold realization spreading through him, starting at his primary heart and radiating outward. Something unfamiliar. Something wrong. My eyes held no rage, no panic, no disappointment. Only calculation. Only intent. Fine, I said calmly. The laughter died instantly. Since you forced us into a war, I continued, we'll make sure it's one you never forget. Then I cut the connection. My projection shattered into fading points of light and disappeared. The 5 council members stared at the empty space where I'd been. Then, slowly, they looked at one another. Later, I could tell Krellith wasn't as confident as he pretended. Uncertainty had crept in, and for someone like him that was rare and deeply uncomfortable. Lyra was the first to voice it. Was that a threat? She asked, the bioluminescent veins in her neck flashing fast in a clear sign of anxiety. Techarwanen's whiskers stiffened completely. Empty posturing, someone said. What can the humans really do? They're already locked in a war with the Granik. They're trapped. The insectoid and reptilian ambassadors nodded along. Everyone seemed eager to believe it. Everyone except one. Krellith noticed Korathes still trembling slightly, though he chose to ignore it. He shoved that cold feeling aside, the one my stare had planted in his chest. He reminded himself who he was. President of the Galactic Council. Leader of the most advanced civilizations in known space. Educated at the finest academies. Holder of 3 doctorates in interspecies diplomacy. 40 cycles of service in council leadership. He wasn't going to let a single Deathwielder's final words shake him. Not now. Not ever. Krellith rose to his full height, and the room immediately focused on him. At nearly 3 meters tall, he loomed over everyone except Ambassador Zytric, whose insectoid body was mostly vertical thorax anyway. His robes shimmered as he moved, threads of glowing fabric woven through them like symbols of refinement and power. This was authority. This was civilization. The Council has acted correctly, he announced. Consider what we have accomplished. He began to pace slowly. Deathwielders are too dangerous to be left unchecked. Both humanity and the Granik Empire represent existential threats to civilized space if allowed to develop freely. He gestured, and holographic displays appeared in the air, military projections, fleet comparisons, casualty estimates. They are aggressive, competitive, and worst of all, they are exceptionally good at warfare in ways we cannot replicate. The data backed him up. Human strategies were chaotic and adaptable. Granik doctrine relied on overwhelming force and relentless assault. Either one, the simulations showed, would shred council fleets in a direct fight. But now, Krellith said, spreading his arms wide, we've turned these 2 apex predators on each other. His voice grew warmer as he spoke. Like directing one plague against another. They will tear each other apart while we remain safely distant. He smiled. The beauty of this strategy is their pride. Neither species will back down. They will fight until exhaustion. Lyra opened her eyes and nodded. The President speaks wisdom. We sacrifice nothing while they sacrifice everything. Karwenen hesitated, then spoke up. But what if they realize what we've done? What if humans and Granik put aside their differences and unite against us? Krellith laughed, loud and booming, echoing through the chamber. The Granik? Compromise? He shook his head. Their culture is built on conquest and martial honor. They would rather die than ally with a species they've declared war on. He leaned forward, pressing his hands against the table. I've studied them for decades. They seek total victory or total annihilation. There is no middle ground. Then he snorted. And the humans? They've been attacked. They've lost ships and people. Their politicians would rather blame the Granik than admit to their own citizens that the council played them. The tension eased. One by one, the ambassadors made their species versions of agreement. You see, Krelith said as he sat back down, the humans are forced to endure this war whether they wish to or not. The Granik will accept nothing less than total war. He pulled up a familiar interface, one that had become disturbingly popular lately. All that remains, he said, is to watch and place our bets. I give the humans 2 cycles, he added. The Granik have larger fleets and centuries of combat tradition. Nonsense, Lyra replied. Humans are resourceful. For cycles. The Granik will crush them in one. Karanen squeaked excitedly. Others chimed in. Credits were wagered. Outcomes debated. Scenarios analyzed. Within minutes, the chamber had shifted from strategy to entertainment. They forgot the cold Krelith had felt. They forgot my eyes. The president smiled and added his own wager. At the very least, he thought this would be entertaining. A full cycle later, no one was smiling. The council chamber sat in stunned silence as a battlefield projection filled the air. Ships from both sides danced through a contested nebula, trading fire in a deadly, precise ballet. Explosions blossomed like flowers of light. Tactical data streamed endlessly along the display. This doesn't match our projections, Techarwanen said quietly. Both militaries are stronger than they were at the start of the war, he continued. Look at the fleet compositions. Lyra frowned. Stronger by how much? At least 30%, Techarwanen answered, pulling up comparative charts. But that has to be temporary. One of them will suffer a major loss soon. Then the decline will begin. Lyra shook her head. And somewhere far away, I imagine that cold feeling returned. Stronger than before. Lyra didn't answer right away. Her long fingers moved across her personal data display, adjusting projections and recalculating figures. To me, she finally said, it looks closer to a 50% increase. For both of them. She lifted her gaze, and for the first time, real concern showed on her face. And that terrifies me. If the humans chose to redeploy even a small portion of their forces, they could strike the council hard with only a fraction of their military. That was when Krelith snapped. His fist slammed into the table, the impact echoing through the chamber like a thunderclap. The argument died instantly. Every eye turned toward him. He rose to his full height, horns gleaming under the chamber lights, his presence filling the room with raw authority. The war is not easy for either side, he admitted, his voice tight but controlled. However, if we maintain a purely defensive posture, neither the humans nor the Granik can touch us. He reached into the central interface and overlaid new projections across the chamber. Defensive fleet formations appeared, layered shield networks, patrol routes, orbital fortresses, woven together into what looked like an impenetrable web around council space. Everyone stared. The numbers were solid, verifiable. The combined council fleets, if they stayed on defense and behind fortifications, could hold out for several cycles even against a full-scale assault. As long as we didn't go on the offensive. As long as we stayed hidden behind walls of our own making. Krelith adjusted his robes and allowed himself a small, confident smile. I hereby declare this crisis session concluded, he announced. The situation is stable and contained. We will continue monitoring events, but there is no immediate cause for alarm. The others nodded, though even then I imagine he noticed something was off. Their relief felt forced. Then, still he ignored it. 10 cycles passed. 10 long, grinding cycles, and the war between humanity and the Granik Empire still hadn't burned itself out. When Krelith looked around the council table again, the shock hit him all at once. They had aged. Lyra's bioluminescent veins were dimmer now, their glow muted and uneven. HFY's fur had gone gray in places that had once been rich and dark. Even Xenthrix looked worn, his polished surface dulled by stress. None of them had bothered with rejuvenation treatments, even though they were readily available. The reason was simple. Their own people were furious. Every one of their species had begun pressuring their leaders to fix the nightmare they'd unleashed. Krelith himself had faced 3 separate impeachment proceedings. Lyra had nearly been arrested by her own planetary government. HFYN required constant armed escorts just to stay alive. His people had tried to assassinate him more than once. Most of them had come dangerously close to being dragged out of office by force. The only thing keeping them in power was fear. Fear, Krelith realized bitterly, had become the galaxy's true currency. It had started in the 4th cycle of the war. That was when humanity unveiled its first so-called Star Destroyer. The name was misleading. It didn't destroy stars, but the ship itself was enormous. Heavily armored, bristling with weapons. One of those vessels could wipe out an entire fleet in minutes. The galaxy panicked. Krelith's own impeachment was quietly delayed when his homeworld descended into chaos. People stopped showing up to work. Entire cities slowed to a crawl. The economy shrank by 13% in a single week. Politics stopped mattering when survival came into question. Then came the 6th cycle. The Granik Empire revealed their own nightmare, FTL warheads capable of striking anywhere in the galaxy within hours. The technology was revolutionary and horrifying. A missile launched from Granik space could hit any world before evacuation protocols even finished loading. Distances that once took months were crossed in an afternoon. For days, the galaxy didn't sleep. Krelith remembered it with painful clarity. Walking through his capital city at what should have been the busiest hour of the day, and finding the streets empty. Noon traffic vanished. Businesses shuttered. Everyone was locked inside their homes, glued to news feeds, waiting for the alert that missiles had launched. Waiting to learn whether they had minutes or hours left to live. Markets didn't decline. They collapsed. Trading was suspended across dozens of worlds because currency itself felt meaningless when death could arrive faster than the news of its launch. 3 governments fell during the panic. Their populations turned on leaders who had no answers, no protection, no hope. People began asking dangerous questions. Why work if you might not survive your shift? Why obey laws when the end could come at any second? For 3 standard days, civilization teetered on the edge of collapse. Then, 1 cycle later, humanity spoke again. They already had the technology. They'd possessed it before the Granik revelation and deliberately kept it secret. They claimed they wanted to avoid triggering a galaxy-wide arms race, what they called mutual assured destruction. They had held the weapon in reserve, hoping never to use it. That revelation somehow made everything worse. The humans could have struck any target they wanted for months, maybe years, and no one would have known. Lyra's species suffered what their psychologists labeled stress-induced suicides. 20% of their population. 20%. Not a single missile had ever been aimed at their world. They had simply broken under the knowledge that death could come instantly, without warning, without defense. Krelith's own people didn't fare much better. They were forced to invent an entirely new class of medication, anti-existential dread pharmaceuticals. Demand exploded overnight. The medical industry couldn't manufacture them fast enough. And the war was still going. People were lining up for hours just to get their prescriptions filled. Entire streets were clogged with nothing but exhausted faces and shaking hands. Across council space, the economy wasn't just slowing down, it was collapsing. Nobody was working. Nobody could focus. How was anyone supposed to care about quarterly projections or production quotas when annihilation could arrive faster than light itself? In some regions, productivity had dropped by 60%. In others, it was closer to 90%. Whole industries simply shut down, like someone had flipped a switch and walked away. Even the wealthy weren't immune. The elite, those who'd always believed money insulated them from consequence, panicked just like everyone else. They finally realized that credits meant nothing against weapons that could turn entire planets into drifting ash. They built bunkers, huge underground cities stocked with decades of supplies. They bought land on distant worlds, as far from the war as they could possibly get, hiding out in remote systems and hoping the Deathworlders would never even notice they existed. They hoarded resources like the end was guaranteed, and honestly, maybe it was. It would have been funny, watching that level of desperation from people who once looked down on everyone else, if it hadn't been so deeply tragic. Even Krelith's own family had begged him to run. His mate had left 3 cycles earlier, taking their children to some far-off colony world in an unnamed system. She'd pleaded with him to abandon his post, to choose family over duty. He refused, not because he was noble, but because he knew the truth. There was nowhere safe. If the humans or the Granik ever decided to strike, no bunker would be deep enough, no colony distant enough. Safety was an illusion and always had been. By the 10th cycle of the war, the galaxy wasn't unstable anymore. It was broken. The daily security briefing had become a ritual of dread. Before the war, the council met once every 5 days. Now it was every day, sometimes twice a day. Always the same reports. New weapons, new capabilities, new reasons to be afraid. Krelith stood at the head of the table, his hands trembling despite his effort to appear composed. Authority was slipping from him, and he knew it. "It'll only be a few minutes," he said, forcing a laugh that came out sharp and unhinged. "Before the Granik Empire announces another galaxy-ending weapon." He laughed again, but this time it sounded wrong. "And then," he continued, "a few days later, the humans will calmly announce that they already had it." His words started spilling out faster. "And then all 5 of us will go another 10 days without sleep while our populations spiral into mass depression or mass suicide." He slammed both fists onto the table. "Do you remember when we thought we were clever?" he shouted. "When we believed we could manipulate these species into destroying each other?" His voice cracked. "How monumentally stupid were we?" He paced like a trapped animal now. "Look at us. Look at the galaxy. These Deathworlders grow stronger every cycle, while we decay, while we break, while we lose our minds." He stopped, shaking. "And are they suffering like this?" he demanded. "The humans? The Granik? No, they're living their lives." He activated the human media feed with a violent swipe. The hologram flared to life, showing Earth's most watched story of the week. A dog being rescued from floodwaters. A dog. Billions of humans were watching emergency responders pull a terrified animal from rushing water, crying, celebrating, sharing the video by the millions, donating to animal shelters. It was the top story. Above the war, above the weapons, above the threat hanging over the entire galaxy. "A dog!" Krelith screamed, pointing at the image with a trembling hand. "This is what matters to them." His voice broke. Not the war, not extinction, a single dog. He switched feeds again, tears already forming. Now the Granik Empire's media filled the chamber. An enormous festival. Thousands of young Granik warriors gathered in an arena, feasting on prey animals they'd killed with their bare claws. A traditional hunting ceremony, ancient, unchanged, as if the universe wasn't burning. "They're celebrating," Krelith sobbed. "They're holding festivals, conducting business as usual. The greatest war in galactic history is happening, and they barely notice." His voice collapsed completely. "We're dying just from hearing about their weapons," he cried. "And they're fine." Tears streamed freely down his green skin now. He didn't try to stop them. He didn't care anymore. The president of the Galactic Council stood before his peers and wept openly. Lyra wrapped her long arms around his shoulders. Ticharwenen patted his arm with small, shaking paws. Even Zytrix's mandibles clicked in a soft, steady rhythm meant to comfort. They all understood. They were all being tortured the same way. When Krelith finally regained enough control to breathe properly, Lyra spoke quietly. "We have to end this war," she said. "At this point, everyone would pay any price. Resources, concessions, anything." Her voice trembled. "No one can survive this level of stress anymore." Teterwena nodded hard, his whole small body bouncing with it. My people aren't even reproducing anymore, he said. Birth rates are almost zero. His voice shook. This madness has to end, or we won't live long enough to see how the war finishes. Krelith straightened slowly, wiping his face with the sleeve of his robe. Inside his mind, something hardened into place. A decision, final and unavoidable. They would find a way out of this nightmare. They would pay any price. They would beg if that's what it took. Anything, absolutely anything, was better than continuing down this road toward collective insanity. We'll begin peace negotiations immediately, he said, his voice rough and worn. Prepare the diplomatic packages. Offer them whatever they want, he added quietly. Just make it stop. 2 more cycles slipped by, spent in frantic diplomatic effort. Concessions were offered that would have been unthinkable before the war. Ideas that would have been laughed out of the chamber in another time. The council liquidated strategic reserves. They abandoned profitable trade routes. They handed over access to technologies that had once been locked behind layers of restriction. Anything to get both sides to the table. Anything to end the nightmare. The cost was beyond staggering. Krelith personally approved expenditures that exceeded the council's entire annual budget, multiple times over. Treasuries were emptied. Ancient favors were called in. Promises were made that would take generations to repay. All for the chance, just the chance, that humanity and the Granik Empire would agree to stop killing each other. Now the council sat in silence, watching a virtual projection. On a neutral world, human ambassadors and Granik nobles shook hands and smiled. The peace conference was broadcast across the galaxy. Every screen showed the same impossible sight. Former enemies laughing together. The hall itself was elegant and neutral, built specifically for this moment on a planet owned by neither faction. Human and Granik design elements blended smoothly, like the building itself was trying to symbolize cooperation. They sat at a round table, humans and Granik mixed together, relaxed in a way Krelith found almost offensive. I swear, one Granik noble said, his translated voice echoing through the chamber. When your fleet pulled that pincer maneuver at the Helix Nebula, I thought we were finished. My command nearly ordered a self-destruct. The human ambassador laughed openly. That was nothing compared to when your dreadnoughts came out from behind the moon. We almost fired everything. 3 seconds, the human added. 3 seconds from mutual annihilation. A close call indeed, the Granik agreed, clearly amused. And I must commend you for respecting civilian target conventions. Many species wouldn't have. As did you, the human replied. You could have wiped out our colony worlds, but you stuck to military targets. That showed honor. One of the Granik noble's eyes gleamed with something dark and delighted. Ah yes, he said, the Galactic Council, the cowards who engineered this entire war. The human ambassador's grin widened. Fuck the Galactic Council. Both sides burst into laughter. Real laughter. Loud. Easy. Shared. They slapped each other on the back, or the closest equivalent their anatomies allowed, and traded war stories like old friends at a reunion. The council chamber was utterly silent. Krelith looked around at the others and saw his own misery reflected in every face. They looked 10 years older than they had just 2 cycles earlier. The peace process alone had nearly broken them. And now they had to watch as humans openly cursed the council, live in front of the entire galaxy, and laughed about it. At least, Teterwanen said weakly, trying to sound hopeful. Now that we've spent nearly all our resources to secure peace, we'll finally get our stress-free lives back. Krelith stared at him. Then he sighed, a deep, soul-weary sound, and began to speak. We need to regulate the Star Destroyers, he said. Both the human and Granik variants. That alone will require 18 separate treaty articles. Each one must be negotiated, ratified, and enforced. Minimum of 5 years. He brought up a holographic list and continued. The FTL warheads require a full ban framework. Verification systems. Inspection regimes. Dismantling schedules. Add 8 more years, assuming full cooperation. The list kept growing. Automated defense systems that nearly caused mutual annihilation need safety regulations, communication standards, and fail-safes. 3 years. Quantum entanglement communication networks, dual-use technology. Monitoring required. 4 years. Kinetic bombardment platforms. Antimatter production facilities. Genetic enhancement programs for soldiers. Each item stacked onto the last. Plasma weapons need output limits. Shield technologies must be standardized to prevent escalation. AI targeting systems need ethical constraints and control oversight. His voice grew tighter. Asteroid weapons platforms. Biological countermeasure systems. Gravitational manipulation tech. Dark matter experimentation. Dimensional folding research. Temporal distortion devices they both began developing in the 8th cycle. He stopped. The list hovered in the air, massive and terrifying. Accounting for negotiations, implementation timelines, verification and enforcement, Krelith said quietly. I estimate it will take 50 years to complete all necessary treaties. 50 years, he repeated, so that our species can sleep without fear again. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Krelith looked at each council member in turn. And that, he added softly, is assuming they cooperate. That's assuming they don't keep developing new technology while we're still busy regulating the old stuff. Krelith went on. Assuming they don't find loopholes. Assuming they even care what we think anymore. He gestured toward the still-playing projection, humans and Granik laughing together like lifelong friends. That, he said quietly, seems unlikely. He sank heavily into his chair. The chamber lights reflected off his horns, dull now, stripped of their former shine. And that's when the final thought settled in, bitter and unavoidable. Betraying humanity had been unimaginably foolish. It hadn't just been wrong, it had been expensive. Not only in credits, but in time, in stability, and in sheer psychological damage. 12 cycles of suffering, all to learn a lesson humans had already mastered. They had invented war for a reason, and they were terrifyingly good at surviving it. Humanity had gone to war with another apex predator species, and come out stronger. Not broken, not traumatized, stronger. They had forged something out of the conflict. An understanding, maybe even the early foundation of friendship with a species that should have been their sworn enemy. Meanwhile, us? The Galactic Council, the so-called most advanced civilizations in known space, the enlightened species who congratulated themselves on clever manipulation and moral superiority, we had collapsed. Our economies lay in ruins. Our populations were psychologically shattered. Our reserves were gone. And ahead of us stretched half a century of frantic diplomacy, just to claw back a fraction of the safety we once took for granted. 12 cycles. 12 cycles spent learning lessons written in human blood and Granik honor. We learned what humanity was truly capable of. We learned how Deathworlders thrived in conditions that shattered civilized minds. We learned that some species could stare straight into the abyss, and then go about their day like nothing had happened. Krelith closed his eyes, and at last, he understood what that human's cold stare had meant 12 cycles ago. You just made a terrible mistake.